Welcome back. Welcome to Talk with History podcast. I am your host, Scott. I'm here with my wife and historian, Jen. On this podcast, we talk about history's continuing impact on all of us and our personal journey through YouTube as we explore, record, and share our history walks with you. Today, Jen, we are talking about Bob Hope.
Yes.
Best known for as like the larger-than-life TV radio personality. Best known probably for the 1950s and 60s, but really he got his start in the 30s. So,
yes.
So why are we talking about Bob Hope today?
Well, first off, I want it really understood that I love Bob Hope, especially what he did with the USO, and I just always thought he was so personable and funny. But we found ourselves living in Erie, Pennsylvania for the last 2 years before we moved here to Virginia. And one of the urban legends of Erie, Pennsylvania is that Bob Hope was married in Erie, PA. And there was more to the story, that he also claimed to be married there a second time to his wife that he was with for 69 years. And the story went that there was really no documentation to back up that second marriage. So there's documentation for the first marriage. There's a marriage license. It's on file at the Erie County Courthouse, but there is no documentation of the second marriage, even though they both always claimed that they were married in Erie, Pennsylvania as well.
So how did you find out about that? How'd you hear about that?
I think I was just looking through, when you move to a new location, you're searching Facebook and looking for local things to do and local stories. And I think there was a Erie like memories page or an Erie, and they were talking about things that had changed in Erie or, just bringing up old memories of Erie, and someone had brought up that story. And so I had read about it and I just found it so interesting.
Yeah. So why don't you, if someone hasn't watched the video, why don't you talk a little bit about Bob Hope and why, especially for that era, I mean, he was just a massive global figure.
Yeah. So Bob Hope, he has a very much an American story. So he's born in 1903 in England, and his parents come over to America when he's 4, and they come through Ellis Island and they settle in Cleveland. And he's one of 7 boys. And he's born Leslie T. Hope. That's his name when he's born. And I think to entertain his brothers, probably get a word in edgewise, he turns to dancing and singing. And he gets his start in vaudeville, which most young actors in the 30s are going to start in vaudeville. And that's where you do... It's a variety show of singing and dancing and little monologues on a stage, kind of like a traveling show, kind of like a circus traveling show without all the animals and oddities.
Right.
And that's how he kind of gets his start. And if you think about geography, Cleveland is only an hour and a half away from Erie. It's to the west, also on Lake Erie. And then Buffalo is an hour and a half to the east of Erie. So Erie always is on a circuit because it's so close to these major cities. And
back in that day, it was on the circuit.
Yes, and it is even today. When tours,
sure, they come up from Pittsburgh or come over from Cleveland or Buffalo or something like that. Okay.
It's just easy to hit that town. And so he had performed in Erie a couple times, and so then in the 1930s, 1933, he has a vaudeville partner named Grace, who he marries at the Erie County Courthouse.
And that's the one that they have the paperwork for.
They have the record of the paperwork for. It was January 25th, 1933. And they have the marriage license. He uses his name Leslie. And I think he claims to be not vaudeville. I think she's a secretary and he's something else on the marriage license. But it's filed, and and they get married, and somehow, it doesn't work out. But his second wife, Dolores Reed, who is his wife that most people will know for 69 years and he will adopt 4 children with, they both claim that they're married February 19th, 1934. So a little over a year later.
Yeah, so it sounds like that first year went really well for Bob Hope.
Exactly. So he must have met, Dolores in that time. They were in a play together called Roberta in 1934. And they get married. They claim to get married in February 1934. So January they meet. So yeah, him and Grace must not have hit it off very well. I know in the divorce decree, which is found by a historian, filed in Cleveland, divorce isn't granted till November 1934.
Which is after when he says he was married.
Exactly. He claims to have married Dolores February 1934, but the divorce isn't granted till November 1934. And he claims gross neglect and I think it's like a mean disposition or disagreeable disposition. So who knows what that means exactly. So
I think that's what any man would put on divorce papers
exactly.
back then. Yeah.
But him and Dolores always hold to the story that they were married in Erie, February 19th, 1934, when really, if you look at papers, he was in New York on Broadway at that time. Now, it's not saying you can't drive to Erie and get married. You can, but
that's a good 7 or 8 hour drive by today's standards.
By today's standards. And Erie seems to be so proud that they kept the original marriage license and kept the paperwork that they say that they would have kept second paperwork if it actually would have been filed. Now, that's not to say that Dolores and Bob were never really married, because you will find celebrities sometimes use initials or they'll use different names, a pseudonym, if they get married. And maybe they had done that, and maybe they had gotten married in another city, in another place. However, they always claim February 19th, 1934 in Erie, when he's still technically married to Grace still.
Yeah. Now, back then, with information not traveling as quickly as it does today, was that more common, or was that still usually people back then would wait until divorce was final and then actually get married? Or was it just kind of like, I filed the paperwork and, she's mean, so I'm going to go somewhere else?
Yeah, I think, it's a lot like that. I think today's day and age technology is so fast, and so documentation is so easy to check and to verify. Back then, not so much. And you could make up a story. You could claim a story, and you could stick by a story. And who's going to actually verify it? Who's actually going to take the time to do that? Unless you're a big star, like he was. But I think they claim a small town like Erie because they can claim, maybe they lost it, or it wasn't filed correctly, or something like that. And since they knew Erie, he had already been married in Erie, he could kind of talk about what the courthouse looked like, or give good verifying evidence.
Did he perform in Erie?
Yes, he did, at the Warner Theater. And on the Walk with History video, we go there to the Warner Theater. It's under construction in the video, and because it was COVID at the time, so they were taking the time to rehab. It's an older theater. It was built by Warner Brothers, but yeah, he had performed in Erie many times. So a place he would know pretty well. But no one's ever found any evidence of that second marriage. And I mean, like I said, Dolores and Bob Hope were married for 69 years. They had one of those marriages that people really look to as like a golden standard of Hollywood marriage. Now, you will always hear stories of Bob Hope's philandering. I don't really talk about that, but he was, there's a lot of that.
Well, he traveled quite a bit, didn't he?
Quite a bit. USO shows. I think, we say it in the Walk with History video, but from 1941 to 1991, he did 57 tours with the USO.
Oh my gosh.
So I think most every leading lady had some kind of affair with Bob Hope. And they openly admit to it. And I think his wife, Dolores, was just accepting of it. And I don't know if this story has anything to do with that, because they're technically not married. I mean, common law, depending on how long and what state you're in. And what's interesting about that as well, and I say this in the Walk with History video, is his first wife, Grace, he maintains a financial situation with her.
Yep.
He takes care of her children by her second marriage, and he pays for her funeral. And even after he passes away, Dolores still keeps up that financial connection to Grace's children. So I'm just telling you the truth. I don't know what that financial connection was all about, but it seems like there's more there.
More there. Yeah. Now, you mentioned connection. Now, I actually have a family connection in, 6 Degrees of Bob Hope. But so once you talk about my family connection, because you were actually more excited about my family connection to Bob Hope than I was when I found out about it.
So I married a true Californian. I married a man with Hollywood history. Your great-grandfather, Dwight Thompson, was a prop master, and I think he worked for Paramount and for Universal. He did 10 Commandments. He did The Greatest Show on Earth. He did Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon. He did Rear Window. And in our home, we have a picture of Rear Window, the movie with Alfred Hitchcock and Jimmy Stewart.
I'm sitting here looking at it right now.
And he has placed the name cards under the windows.
Yep.
So if you ever see the movie, Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly kind of name every window. They give them kind of like a cute name based on how they're acting or what they see.
Yeah.
And he actually has those name cards under the windows as he's setting curtains or props that you would see in the background, like what's on the table, the pianist on the composer on his piano and things like that. So we have a picture of him with Yul Brynner in 10 Commandments.
Yep.
And we have a picture of him setting the basket in Moses.
Yeah. No, and just for the audience, right? I was vaguely aware growing up, right? So in my youth, I would drive from Central California down to Southern California to visit my grandparents. And in the garage, I always remember seeing, so he used to work the set of Bonanza.
Yes. He did all of the episodes.
He did every single, all seasons, all the episodes and all that stuff, right? So that was his regular job. And I always remember seeing in my childhood, that's where we would go down and we would play Nintendo, and then the adults would be in the other rooms, like hoping that we didn't come bother them. But I always remember seeing the 3 main characters from Bonanza with their signatures to my great-grandfather.
Yes.
And it's I can picture it right now, but just above the light switch in my garage, just down the stairs off to the right, that's where the picture would just hang. It might still be there.
I'm not Michael Landon and the Ponderosa, right? The ranch. See, we don't even, our parents would know better than us.
Yeah.
But so your connection is your grandmother, so his daughter, your grandmother, has a picture with Bob Hope.
Yep.
And it's signed to her and dedicated. And it looks like a very familiar picture.
Yeah, she looks like she was probably 16.
Yeah.
She's a teenager.
Yeah.
Maybe?
And it looks like she's in a home with him or like, it doesn't look like she's at some kind of signing thing. It looks like she's like, oh, he probably brought her to work one day because he did a movie with him. He did Fancy Pants with him and Lucille Ball. Yep. It's on his IMDb page. If you ever look up Dwight Thompson, and maybe he had brought her, that's your grandmother, his daughter. Maybe he had brought her to the set one day or something like that. Yeah. But that's how we have that family connection to Bob Hope. Yeah. Which I have through marriage now.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting. And again, for those listening and for those who haven't seen the video, we talk a little bit about my family connection, but it's fun to talk a little bit more about it here because you really dove more into my family ties with Bob Hope and the movie industry. And I started finding out about my family history in Hollywood through you because you were asking my father and he had all these records and old things. We've got movie scripts sitting in our house now.
Yes, we got the script to The Greatest Show on Earth with Charlton Heston and Jimmy Stewart. Cece DeMille movie, which was same thing as 10 Commandments. And then we have a call sheet from Some Like It Hot
That's
with
right.
Marilyn Monroe going to set at the Hotel Del.
Yeah, so it was interesting doing this video because it let us explore not just Bob Hope and his two supposed marriages and the interesting kind of secret there that not a lot of people know about. But if you're from Erie, that's kind of a part of, you know, in these small towns, Erie is about 100,000 people.
Yes.
And for I would call it a smaller city in the greater United States, a big character like that's a kind of a point of pride there.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, Bob Hope, we were trying to think about who would be the equivalent to him today. And we can't really think of someone because he was a larger than life figure. He did like 54 feature films. He did a ton of things with Bing Crosby. He was one of those actors who transitioned from radio to feature film. And then he hosted the Academy Awards forever.
Yeah, so I was trying to think about it. And at first I was like, well, maybe Jay Leno, right? The Tonight Show. But Jay Leno didn't travel all over the world going to USO shows. So I think if you combined like Billy Crystal, Jay Leno, and, you know, take someone from radio, put them all together.
Yes.
That was Bob Hope. I mean, Bob Hope
was
the larger-than-life host. I mean, he was the Hollywood host. That's how I would describe him for the 50s and 60s.
He was a huge influence on the USO. It's because of him that Marilyn Monroe went on the USO tours, and Anne Margaret. Like, he was the pull for all that. I mean, he was his comedic timing. They say his comedic timing is one of the best in history.
Although I will say one thing when I was researching stuff for the YouTube video, and I encourage folks to go watch it if you're listening, because it is very interesting. And I find some old USO clips. Mm-hmm. And the clips and the jokes that he tells overseas to these GIs overseas, he would not be able to tell today.
They don't stand up in time.
No. I'd say probably 40% of them don't. He was pretty clean. It's not like he was cursing like a sailor.
No, it was more cultural.
It was the more cultural references that, like, back then people didn't think about. Today, he would get canceled.
Totally get canceled. He was self-deprecating, of course. He would definitely make fun of himself. And his one-liners are great and so funny. It's a lot like Billy Crystal does. But yeah, he definitely was a larger than life character. And the marriage, the marriage story is just a very, very interesting story. And that's why we kind of have the thumbnails kind of him saying like, shh, be quiet. Because it is kind of like a secret that he never really married. I mean, there's no documentation that he ever really married Dolores. And I don't know if I actually convey that very well in the video, because it is one of our early videos. Yeah. And I'm trying to say it, but that's the whole point. Is he a bigamist, or did he lie about his second marriage?
Yeah. And this was our third video, I think, that we had done. So then if we transition over to talking about how we're filming and how we're trying to figure this out, like, we had literally, this was our third one filming, right? You were still getting used to the handling the camera and talking to the camera. And I was getting used to how to tell these stories, which is difficult to do when there's lots of information and you're trying to tell a story about a real person, true events, and still keep it interesting.
Yes.
So that was difficult. So, it's one of our earlier videos. Yes. I would say our more recent videos. If folks are interested, they can go watch. But, it was still just a very interesting, because he is Americana. He is embodied. Mm-hmm. So
people know that profile.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Now there was, Bob Hope was kind of a jokester all the way, basically until his deathbed.
Oh yes. So do you remember what he said to his wife when she asked him where would you like to be buried? Do you remember what he said to her?
I don't.
He said, surprise me.
He said, surprise me. So if you think about that, right, here's Bob Hope, knowing that he's probably going to pass before too long. And his wife says, hey, where do you want to be buried? And he just says, surprise me.
Yeah. He dies at 100 in 2003. So
he was 100.
He was 100.
Oh my gosh. Well, so again, this was a very interesting video, and it was fun to make because not only did we live in Erie, and that Erie had ties to Bob Hope and his first marriage and supposedly his divorce and second marriage, which no one was able to ever confirm. So that's what we point out in the video is, hey, was he technically married to two people at the same time? And then from there, not only was there that in here in Erie, but then I go on to find out through my family, that I have personal ties. We have family ties now to Bob Hope through my family and my great-grandfather, who worked in the Hollywood industry. He was a prop master for many old movies in the 60s, 70s, 50s, all that stuff. So again, thank you, Jen, for kind of taking us through an interesting fact that a lot of people don't know about Bob Hope, who was a larger-than-life character.
Absolutely.
And for those who are listening, we thank you for listening. Please feel free to kind of share this podcast with your friends if you think that they would find these kinds of topics fun to listen to. You can reach out to us on Twitter at Talk with History and tell us where in the world you're tweeting from. And I want to know if you guys know of any other interesting facts about Bob Hope. For those listening, if you're on Twitter, or you can just reach out to us through our website, talkwithhistory.com. Let us know if you knew anything else interesting about Bob Hope.
Absolutely. Are you rediscovering him now through us, or did you know who he was?
Yeah, so thank you again, and we will talk to you guys again soon.
Yeah, thank you.